Hello and welcome to another episode of the Transportation Exchange podcast presented by Rush Truck Centers of Canada. I'm your host, Jason Cuddy. On today's episode, we're excited to welcome Joe Lynch, who's the Senior Vehicle Standards Engineer with the Ministry of Transportation. Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So we wanted to have you on and get some updates on what's going on at the MTO. But before we do that, I thought we'd dig in a little bit to who Joe is and how you got tied up into our industry here.
Interesting story. So I went to the University of Western Ontario when it was called the University of Western Ontario. Now it's just Western.
Right.
I was doing my Bachelor of Engineering Science in Mechanical Engineering with a stream in manufacturing, actually. So most of my university career was focused on, robotics and manufacturing controls and things like that, and machine learning code, those types of things. And when I graduated, I was looking for a job. And I have a background in racing. So I grew up racing go-karts. I started when I was like 9, pretty mechanically inclined. When I was in high school, I bought my first pickup truck when I was like 17 and repaired the whole thing in my driveway and put it back on the road. So I was looking for something in manufacturing. Obviously, the market wasn't that great at the time. This is 2003. Right. And so there were some job fairs that took place at our school. I forget exactly how I came in contact with the consulting firm out of Windsor. It's called Reike Consulting Engineers. What they do is accident investigation and reconstruction. So I took my first job out of university there and started investigating accidents and reconstructing them using scientific methods and computer simulations and things like that. Obviously, it's something you need to be mechanically inclined for because you have to inspect vehicles. You kind of got to sort of know something about vehicles. And they did a lot of work in the heavy truck world. So I got teamed up with guys that came out of like International, left International, came to Reike, and started their career in that sort of consulting world. So I had a lot of support there, to kind of sort of gain expertise on heavy trucks. Heavy trucks obviously crash into everything,
right?
And everything crashes into them. So, whether it's a cyclist accident or a pedestrian or another car or anything else. So, and I did work with one of the firms that was kind of leading in that world. One of the first firms in North America to actually participate in downloading heavy truck data and doing testing to verify that data was accurate. ECMs were just coming online in like 98 or so. They were becoming more prominent. Not everyone knew what kind of data was contained therein, but there was data there. Regardless of what type of engine platform, there was something that you could pull down off the engine and understand heavy trucks. So I worked in that world for about 9 years. And a lot of the work was basically everything we did was a fatal accident, right? There was very minimal, like low speed, low impact, whiplash type claims. We were working for insurance companies mainly, some private lawyers and stuff, civil lawsuits and whatnot. But at the end of the day, I ended up leaving that firm and taking a position with MTO. And I started out overseeing just vehicle weights and dimensions regulations. I worked in what was called the Goods Movement Office and the Transportation Policy Branch. So I started getting my hands into everything, basically manufacturing coming out of university. I understood things like lean supply chain management.
Right.
So I could appreciate, the rail side of the business, the marine side of the goods movement business, and the truck side of the business. And I kind of sort of had a grander appreciation of logistics and all those types of things. So, I was quickly kind of sort of the resident truck guy. We had a rail guy, a marine guy, and then I was the truck guy. And then, slow but sure, I started to progress towards more of the commercial motor vehicle side of the ministry. So now I work in it's a commercial vehicle branch, basically. I worked as a team leader. It's only in the past 3 years that I've taken this position as Senior Vehicle Standards Engineer. It is a mechanical engineering role. There's only one other engineer in our branch, and she is a weight and load engineer. So she oversees permits. She's civil, obviously, right? So main concern, moving large objects, super loads, making sure bridges don't fall and pavement doesn't fall out from underneath them. They don't take out, construction sites, all those types of things, right? I have some expertise, but obviously furthest thing from a bridge engineer. So, so I'm kind of sort of considered a ministry resource when it comes to that. Like commercial vehicle, there is a vehicle standards engineer that works in another office, in another branch. I work closely with him on a lot of things. Jeff Turner, and Jeff Turner's very much an expert in the passenger vehicle world. Right. So together, with the different engineering expertise, he works in a research office as well. There's some PhDs and things that are folks that are in there, and other engineers as well that, pretty much the smartest folks that I think that work in the ministry. Nice. Heads and tails above me. So, I go to them for advice because sometimes they're just purely the experts, so that's basically my career. I've been with the ministry since, April 5th, 2011.
Wild.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. And I think, as you said, you've kind of become the default go-to, I think, for the industry when we're kind of connecting with the ministry directly. Like I know we've worked together doing some DRTA stuff, and you've been gracious enough to kind of, present to our group and keep us updated on what's going on. And I see you elsewhere. So I know industry-wise, everyone knows you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I did come in right at the time when the Ontario Regulation 413.05 came in, the weights and dimensions for safe, productive, and infrastructure-friendly vehicles. I guess it launched. It was already in place. The regulation was in place, but we ascended the regulation July 1st, 2011.
Right.
So I kind of came in right at that time. I knew I had a full appreciation of the law and the equipment and how people could probably do things. My predecessor was obviously deeply involved in structuring the regulation and the consultation process, so he was able to pass along a lot of knowledge there. And working directly with the CTEA, which I already had, the Canadian Transportation Equipment Association, I already had a relationship with the folks that were working there, and the technical folks that were working there. So, initially for the first 2 years I worked for the ministry, I did a lot of road shows, SPIF road shows, go around and teach people what was going on, where they fit into industry, where their different pieces of equipment fit in, and then explain to them why they can't run equipment that they used to be able to run. It worked for 40 years. It worked for 40 years, but there are some shortcomings, right? Working for 40 years is fantastic, but we also need to maintain our taxpayer investment in infrastructure. So if something's beating up our bridges, we're planning for 30-year bridge and it's only lasting 15. That's really no joke to a taxpayer.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because there's a substantial investment in that bridge.
Yep.
And what side of the balance sheet it goes on and how it depreciates and how it likely impacts the balance sheet, right? Yep. And our budget and everything like that. So trying to explain certain things like that and the safety portion of it, the dynamic performance of vehicles, which I was obviously extremely familiar with because of my previous job. So that's how I got to know a lot of people across the province in the trucking industry, because I really did travel from Thunder Bay across to North Bay, all the way south and across to Ottawa, all the way down to Windsor and back. I think total I did probably about 250 different events. Wow. And I would structure it and try and structure what I was their workshops, essentially trying to structure it to the folks that were in the room. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to go talk to a bunch of folks that run in the straight truck industry, there's no sense in going to talk to them about lowboy tractor semi-trailers and, what a self-steer quad is and, what the benefits are running into Quebec with that type of equipment, versus a truck, a truck trailer, dump truck, or, some of the trucks that you guys have outside here.
Yep. No, it makes sense. And I know when it came in, I think those road shows were great because like every new legislation, there's a lot to read, a lot to understand, and kind of a lot to figure out where do I fit in. And there wasn't much gray, but it's just understanding, what do I have today, the truck that doesn't work, how do I get to what I need to work, and what does that look like? And, like I said, it's been around for 11 years now. So I think it's pretty much ingrained. I think, we've kind of got rid of most of that stuff. Is there any grandfathered vehicles or grandfathered clauses left in that legislation?
Well, the phase 4 still, phase 4 came in 2011, right? So we have, 15 years there. Right. So there's still a bunch of 2010s that are going to be grandfathered till 2026. Phase 3, we did add some additional grandfathering because the heavy haul industry, we had a lot of Basically, a lot of equipment. In 2012, we realized that we had a lot of stagnant equipment, obviously coming out of a pretty deep recession, some issues that took place with the banks in 2009. Our manufacturing industry, these guys just had a bunch of equipment and no loads to pull. So It was very low mileage. So we had already given the forest industry like 20 years or something like that. So we added a few more years. But we are coming to the end of it. In the next 4 years, pretty much it's SPIF or non-SPIF, no grandfathering left, and we move forward. What I find the most interesting about the whole thing is the change and the shift that I'm seeing in carriers and their decision making and how they're operating their equipment. The realizations of some carriers about, well, if I invest in this type of equipment that's like a twin steer versus something with a lift axle, it might be better in the long run.
Right.
There's certain types of pieces of equipment that just work in that industry, and they are always going to work. And in the tractor semi-trailer industry as well, you see a big difference. What I used to see on like 3-4 axles, now you're seeing folks that are going, well, if I can run 5 axles and I don't even need to think about my load.
Right,
and now I have smart lift axles and self-steer, and everything kind of does itself. But I can maximize my weight every time. It's super, and there's huge benefits. And albeit that equipment can only run in Ontario and into New York and Michigan, if all your runs are in Ontario,
it doesn't matter.
You're winning.
Exactly.
You're not leaving weight on the table. You're not because that one little piece could cause another truck to have to go down the road.
Yeah,
that's a setback for the company.
And we've seen that with our trailer side. We get into those type of specialized trailers, and that's where the conversation's going. Trailers do last quite a while. So as they're getting into new equipment, and you roll into the SPIF and you say, hey, the setup you used to run, you can run a little bit differently. Maybe not how you would have thought you'd run, but here's what it does for you. It opens up some doors. It doesn't limit you. Where if you do what you're doing before, kind of handcuffed, you know. And like I said, if you stay in Ontario, hey, you're great, if you're going out west, okay, you gotta look at it differently. But that's what we found too. Guys are kind of, it's been around long enough now that people are understanding, okay, how do I make this work for me and maximize the weights, and have with customers. I've reached out to you and some other people like, hey, does this setup make sense? Have I maxed out this spec on a truck to do what the guy wants to do as well? Like, make sure I'm not leaving any options on the table for him that, I missed as a salesperson specing it. So I think everyone's kind of wrapped their head around it. And like I said, in the next handful of years, it'll be SPIF or non-SPIF, and it's, there's no more gray kind of in the vehicle side. No,
and a lot of people, remarkably in the past few years, what I've noticed is speaking to different groups, how if they didn't realize before they could run in the non-SPIF world. Right. They didn't realize that the weight cutback didn't impact their business. They're moving light, bulky goods, So, I sit down and I talk to a group, and, at the end of it all, they have big smiles because they're like, you mean I don't have to change anything, because I don't need those high weights. It's really built for the high weight vehicles, right? Like the super highway that's doing the more damage to our highways. And also, there's safety considerations there. I actually had some folks that came and got grandfather permits for vehicles and then realized I didn't even need those.
Didn't need them.
Yeah. Like they were trying to grandfather the old weights, and they said, I could have just stuck with table 32. It would have been totally fine. It just really depends on what your business is. But those things are all coming out in the wash now. And so now you're really starting to see it, and people realizing what they can and can't do. It's kind of sort of rare that we run into something that's strange or oddball. But I do, I work with the OPP and the Toronto Police and our enforcement team. They'll come back to me and tell me some things, that I learn on road. And I say, that's funny because I just had a conversation with somebody not too long ago about the same issue. The trucking industry is pretty connected, right? Yeah, for sure. So somebody gets stopped and they find something, and then, somebody else is calling me. Hey, well, this guy down the street got a ticket. Oh, yeah, I know. But it's, people, as they learn and as they understand it, I think, I've seen a lot of areas in industry where they've actually were initially resistant. Right. And I went and I spoke with them, spoke with members of different associations, different vocations, right? Like from forestry to, just different areas around the province as well. Now these guys are more welcoming to it. They found advantages, like, hey, I can run tri-drive self-steer quad in forestry and do pretty well on weights. And it handles really well in the bush. And, this isn't actually that bad. All I ever was used to was the tandem drive with a 5-axle semi-trailer.
Right.
And I don't need it. I can run this, and, the mills are happy. And so there's been a great shift in the past 10 years in the different equipment that we see on road, but it's really positive. I found at the end, when I first started MTO, I say there was a lot of negative. Yeah. Now it is a lot of positive. I do hear a lot of guys that, oh yeah, now that I figured this out, you wouldn't believe, how better my business is doing or something. Yeah. I need one less truck at the end of the day. I got one less driver. That's huge to me, because before that I was struggling to make ends meet. Now I'm, comfortable.
Yeah. Makes sense. And just time, right? Just time wrapping through, go through a couple buying cycles and, business changes, different economies. So yeah, I think you said everyone's kind of adapted to it, and it's just, found a way to make it work for their business now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of the other things you guys are doing outside of, SPIF, which has been around a while, but, there's some new programs that kind of behind the scenes. You've got technology is kind of everywhere. The EV side, I know it's more of a federal thing as far as the grants, and that's come out, and which is great, and it's nice to see. But tied into kind of, I guess, the EV world, you get into the automated kind of world of the vehicles and connected vehicles. Maybe kind of talk us a little bit about where the ministry is with with that in regards to the industry.
Yeah, so connected and autonomous vehicles, or highly automated vehicles, or people have different terms that they like to use. We've kind of sort of moved from this in the past while, from the CVAV context to the CAV. It's just connected automated vehicles. They're the same thing. Like automated vehicles, we developed a regulation to bring these vehicles onto the road for testing purposes. In 2016, it was January 1st, 2016, actually, that we brought in the first regulation in Canada, to allow testing of CVAVs. It was very tight. To get into the program, we were watching very closely because we knew that we may have to pivot. We were watching what was happening in the United States. We talk about things like self-certifying vehicles and stuff like that. We were kind of worried, right? Engineers especially were worried. I have a robotics background. I did testing with vision systems back when I was in university. When I was in fourth year, that was one of my projects, was actually on vision systems, and recognizing the fact that you could have a reflection of light, and all of a sudden my camera can't see anything. All it sees is a wall of light. And it's the same type of concept we started to see early on when accidents started taking place on road. So we were paying close attention to that. But we did approve 13 entities. Only 10 were active at the time. I'm not sure how many we have today in our program. But in 2019, we updated the program a little bit. There was a question about heavy vehicles, commercial motor vehicles in general. And so in discussion with the minister at the time, how are we going to position this? There's some asks from industry. Testing automated driverless AVs was one thing that we wanted to start to allow with proof. Right. So there's a lot of oversight there. We don't have any that are actually driverless at this point. They may be driving automated down the road, but there's always a safety attendant. There's a second piece to it, which was, what are we going to do with commercial motor vehicles? So currently, our automated vehicle test regime is not designed for commercial motor vehicles. Gotcha. We didn't consult industry on it. We didn't consult the public on it. It was focused on passenger vehicles, anything lighter than 4,500 kg, basically, or in 10 passenger vehicle, right? So anything that needs a CVOR, it wasn't designed for that. Gotcha. Right? Instead, what we did was we introduced cooperative truck test platoons. So we had the cooperative truck pilot, our platooning pilot program. There's a bunch of information on our website about it, but we launched that. And that was in direct consultation with industry experts, safety experts, some of the leading folks that were out there that were already in testing in industry, but also the leading folks from the experts at SAE and stuff that were actually doing other testing, developing J standards and thinking about how are we going to move forward. And so what we wanted to do was kind of sort of introduce something to allow commercial motor vehicles to test. They can test on a on a few sections of highways in the province. There's all the maps available. It's the authorized network. They're really short stints along the highway where our highway engineers have approved travel in that area. It's all 400 series. Right. It's nothing on King's highways. It's all, basically segregated, controlled access, freeway style roads. And so the third piece when we introduced in 2019 was actually allowing something that was more along the lines of what we call SAE level 3 testing. So it was closer to being fully automated. But what we were trying to do as well is thinking about there are some vehicles that are out on road already.
Right.
That fall into this category. It's a mixed category. Like if you talk to Transport Canada, they'll say the same thing the way they see it. You'll talk to people at SAE, they'll say the same thing. We have these categories of vehicles under SAE and their J standard, right? But then there's ones that kind of fall in between. So is it a 2-3 vehicle? Is it level 2 or is it level 2-3?
Right.
Is it level 3 or level 3-4? Like these.
There's some gray there.
Yeah. So, but I mean, when you have Tesla and Volvo and these different manufacturers already producing these vehicles, they're already being sold. We kind of sort of had to open the door for those, right?
Right,
So
makes sense.
They're going to be eligible for sale in Canada. We got to govern it somehow. But what we're not allowing is fully driverless, right? So the gentleman that you saw on the highway the other day on the news that was sleeping in his Tesla, he's got a fistful of tickets because now it's dangerous driving and all those. I mean, complete no oversight over the vehicle. Who knows how he tricked it into, letting it know his hands weren't there or whatever these things are doing. But, that's, that was that piece. So heavy truck platooning, like that program, we still haven't had a run. We have not had one run. We do have an authorized company to operate. They have full authorization to go out and do testing. The way that our regime works, if you read the conditions for the program that are available online, you'll see that they need to contact us before they do a run. We need to approve that run beforehand. There's a bunch of checks and balances that are in place because we haven't seen anything happen yet.
Right.
So what we want to do is get some runs under our belt, right? And then think about how we might want to restructure the program.
Tweak it, once you see it live.
That's it. So, and then in the past while, like some of the enhancements that we made to the program, just allowing manufacturers to start testing their own stuff appropriately without having to go through hoops to get into our AV program. We can allow them through manufacturer plates to be eligible. You still need to be approved to participate, but you can use M-plated vehicles. Expanding those M-plated vehicles as well. If they can, we're allowing them basically to charge for freight or goods and charge a fee. They're still light vehicles, right? But if you have like say a FedEx or a Purolator or something like that, and they want to run some small vehicle in Toronto, thinking about things like that, because previous to that, there was no goods or freight allowed.
Right.
And so we wanted to kind of expand that. There's modifications to vehicles that people are doing, namely university students, right? So, they'll take true vehicles and test their own. So we developed we kind of sort of removed the restrictions around what they can and can't do. We've also started to look at other things like automated farm vehicles. We know we've seen them already. Our farm vehicle rules, the way that the law is written, if you're driving the farm vehicle, you must be 16.
Gotcha.
You don't need a license, but it's an if.
Right.
And there's never been anything there that said there must be somebody driving. It's those little things that back in the day you never really thought about. It
wasn't an issue until now.
No, exactly, right? And now it's like, oh, wow, hey, you're right.
That one word creates a lot of gray.
Yeah. Great for the farm industry, right?
Yeah,
great to be able to throw a combine out in a field, set it up with GPS, and then just sit on your porch and watch it. Yeah. But huge advancements there. But then it's moving these large vehicles between sites.
Right. Good point. Yeah.
And it's all done on road. We know how tight roads can be, gravel shoulders. Last thing you want is one of these things to flip off into a ditch or cause an accident with somebody else. So we know they're out there. We know they're operating. We've seen them in Saskatchewan before and had lengthy conversations about them 4 or 5 years ago, actually. Yeah, and so that's really like for CVAV, that's really where we are right now.
Gotcha. It's still an emerging technology for, even on our side on the OEMs, right?
Absolutely.
It's coming. Obviously, there's some testing in the States. You see what's going on at different levels in different areas, but it'll be a slow adaptation, I think. But it's one of those, might be a wave that once it starts to open, and if people see benefits and from a ministry point of view, think you open up a bit more where you can operate these things, then there's more interest, and kind of, one feeds the other. So it'll slowly grow, but obviously you've got to start somewhere and set some parameters of how do you at least get the ball rolling, right?
Yeah.
So
and as we learn, we learn every time something happens. It might not even be in Ontario; it's some other place. We gain an appreciation sometimes what's happening in the heavy truck world, the autonomous testing that's happening in the U.S. Through our partners at CVSA, for instance. CVSA, obviously, we've got the best enforcement folks from all over North America sitting in a room together talking about the same subjects, except for some of them actually have experience on road with these vehicles. Like the latest is, what do we do with pre-trip inspections? Do we need to enhance that? Likely. But our problem is where are the cameras, where are the radars, what's doing what, and what makes a truck autonomous ready? Like what makes it safe to go down the road with a driver on board? Right. But there's other things like even just from our own program, looking at the automated vehicles. We have passengers on board on shuttles and things like that are operating. So there is, basically anyone that's operating in our program now, they have to come to us and tell us when they're going to test, when they've stopped tested, when they're going to restart testing. If there's any incidents, they got to tell us right away, and then submit something within 10 days, kind of informing us fully about the incident, any police documentation or otherwise. Little things that we've learned here and there. Increased insurance requirements and things like that, like liability. We do have an arm within the MTO that works across with some other ministries to develop, and look at what liabilities these folks should have. There is a mathematical equation to this that I don't get, but that's what their expertise is. And then very specific rules around these vehicles, right? Like, there's the easiest thing like, it must be working in proper working condition, and must be safe, but like, again, we are leaving some of that to the operators themselves, cause they have better appreciation of their vehicle, which though means that for us, we need to vet them extremely close before we allow them on road. Right. We want to make sure that they know what they're doing, that they have operational plans that make sense. Like I spoke with an autonomous vehicle company, they're not in our program here in Ontario. But I was I wasn't taken aback by the questions that I was being asked, but it's some of those simple things. Well, if our vehicle encounters something on road and, they're going to slow to a stop, like, should we slow to a stop and then put on our four-way flashers? So, well, does your vehicle know at that time that it's going to slow to a stop for an emergency that's ahead of it? Yes. Mm-hmm. Well, do you like it when somebody slams on the brakes in front of you for no reason? Yeah, that's what our signals are for, right? Like it's, I'm turning right ahead. Before you brake, you signal so people behind you see. It's the same sort of thing. Concept, yeah. But like, again, these people aren't road safety experts, some of them, right? They're engineers, they're robotics experts, like they know exactly how their vehicle works, how the algorithm works, why it's doing certain things. But they might not be the people who understand every traffic law in the province, right? Yeah. So working with these folks like that to develop their technologies, that's really helpful, I think, in the long run.
Yeah. So that makes sense. And another piece I wanted to touch base with you here, it's kind of ongoing, it keeps going. Hopefully we're at the end of it, is the famous ELDs. So currently we're September of 2022. What's the current outlook that you see as far as full adaptation into the industry?
Yeah, well, so Transport Canada I guess they've been working pretty hard. First to onboard some certification bodies, right? So electronic login devices, when they first came online in the US, we saw the need for it before that. We understood the technology and how it could be utilized and what could probably make a lot more sense to make our roads safer. So we knew, everyone in the trucking world, in the enforcement world, whether you're working as police or MTO enforcement officer, CVSA folks across North America, we all knew that there was some cheating going on. It's not hard to find sometimes. Usually we find out post-accident though, right? So an accident takes place, you start digging through the cab, you realize there's 3 logbooks, nothing aligns. You're trying to figure out which one's the one he was actually doing the math in before he had his clean book. And then you start realizing some things, and the trends and statistics weren't that good. So, introducing ELDs made sense, but we learned from the US. The US, again, they had a self-certification body. So they built a box for everyone to live in. That company came and said, yes, we are living in that box. Okay, great. So then they approved them. They put them on the list of approved electronic logging devices. And lo and behold, they didn't live up to the law. So we realized that early on. Some of our own officers realized that early on. We found some really wacky stuff on road, and we said, okay, something's not adding up. So when we CCMTA, so the Canadian administration, it's all the administrators across Canada, developed a team to basically task force, right? To look at, okay, what are we going to do with ELDs? How are we going to implement them? What's the best foot forward with Transport Canada? Transport Canada, we came to the conclusion we need to have a certification body. That's going to delay everything. Right. We knew it. Yeah. First, we had to develop the regulations around it, right? Like how are you going to regulate or legislate this body? And then we got to onboard this body. So we already kind of sort of knew this is going to be a 2 years at least sort of deal. Yeah. And that there was these short timelines that were given by Transport Canada. Like we understood the safety impacts. We get that. We understood the US impacts. We get that. And we know that there's a need for this, but we need to do it right. So, we did bring in those, Transport Canada onboarded those groups. Now they've actually developed a list. So, in March this past year, CCMTA met, they've met several times on the same subject and obviously delayed enforcement because the law was going to come into place and there really wasn't anything certified out there. Right. You needed to have, some bodies of ELD providers that were certified. And also there was a big lineup, right? So you had a bunch of folks that are already in that world. They're operating in the US, but their equipment wasn't certified. That would cost industry a lot of money, right? Because then all of a sudden you're forced to switch from the company you're currently with to one that's already certified. And what would happen if that company became certified not too long after that? Now you've invested in something else.
Potential mess.
That's it. So right now where we are is there is a mandate. So basically the mandate is by the end of 2023, everybody's going to be
fully on board.
Bus carriers who are operating in Ontario only, because we have introduced the Ontario law. Those Ontario carriers, they'll be required to use ELDs, certified ELDs by July 1st, 2023. Okay. Now, with the truck drivers, commercial vehicles, it was supposed to be around this summer, right? Yeah. So what we've done is we've delayed it. So we said, okay, June 12th, 2022 onward, we're going to give education and awareness. So we have been stopping folks, Canada or US carriers, doesn't matter. If they don't have an ELD, they might still be using paper logbooks, or they might be using an ELD that's not currently certified. We are educating them, saying, okay, listen, you're good to go until January 1st, 2023. January 1st, 2023 is when we're going to actually start penalizing folks on road for federally regulated carriers. And Ontario is also we have a complementary education period, awareness period that is in place right now as of this summer. And so that's going to go through to January 1st, 2023 as well. So without penalties for provincially regulated carriers. So basically, federally or provincially, doesn't matter. Right. Your drop dead's January 1st, 2023. There's a pretty healthy list now of ELD providers that are certified to operate. But January 1st, 2023 for commercial trucks, July 1st, 2023 for buses. That's pretty much it. Basically, carriers need to continue to prepare to adopt ELDs. Certified ELDs are becoming more available. our advice is always to research ELD devices, like the options that are out there. There's some different programs that are out there that might benefit your business as you're looking at the certification list and looking through the different providers. Some of them have different functions, right? And some of them are more beneficial to some businesses or not, especially long haul world. Because we're doing this educational period, I think, like our interactions are, from what I'm hearing from our enforcement officers, the interactions with the carriers are actually pretty good. The drivers are good. Yeah. Nothing else has really changed when it comes to hours of service, right? True. So it's really just about how to operate this ELD. That's really the biggest issue, is knowing how to operate it once you get it, and training your drivers. Because, if you get stopped and you're at roadside and you don't know how to give us the data, if you can't email it to us, print something off on board, which I have seen actually, carriers with the printing machine attached to their ELD, if you can't give that to us, it's not, essentially you're pulling out a paper logbook and you're copying down everything. And then the officer's looking over your shoulder, making sure that it is correct. And then it matches what he's seeing in the ELD as well, like in front of him. Either way, you're transferring to paper. So you're sitting on the side of the road, drawing out your logbook when it could have been a lot easier.
A little bit of training goes a long way with those.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, driver switching, and we've come across that numerous times already. You got a driver that slips seats to another driver and forgets to log out. The other guy forgets to log in, and next thing you know, Bill's driving for 22 hours, and you realize, but Sean's actually driving. It's not Bill, those sort of things. Yeah. People will as the drivers use them more,
get used to them.
They'll get used to them. We have had some complaints. Some of them are interesting complaints, because when you complain about having to abide by the law,
it doesn't go very well, does it?
No. So, but otherwise, on the flip side, though, I've had some carriers and drivers who always stuck by like HOS, by hours of service. Yeah. They were always on top of the law. They knew the safety ramifications, and they're saying, "Hey, this is a lot easier. Like, I actually welcome this." Mm-hmm. I was even hesitant. I was skeptical, but now I don't need to think anymore. Like, I start, I stop, I go, I drop my freight, I press go again, and then it tells me when I'm done. Like,
yeah, no, that's good. And I know, even talking to, customers and carriers, the nice part with it coming on board is it standardizes the industry, right? Because you knew guys were cheating the system, and guys who have been running them for quite a while, just because they're either running to states, or they saw what it does and the ease it does in interacting, with inspections, but just also keeping track of hours of service. So those guys are almost kind of getting penalized because other guys are skirting the system, and doing it because they knew they could. But it's, hopefully neutralizes that and puts everyone on the same playing field.
Yeah. Yeah.
So speaking of the inspection part, if anyone's been driving around on the highways, you're starting to see some change, I guess. And maybe you can kind of give us a bit of insight of what the future looks like at the commercial vehicle inspection stations across Ontario.
Yeah, so I was involved in this project a few years ago. It was really interesting. It was before, not this past election, but before the election before that. We needed some rehabilitation of our truck inspection stations. Some of them were wholly inadequate. Some of them just needed rehabilitation. It was time. We had this traditional truck inspection station idea. Except for, like looking across the province, all of our truck inspection stations looked a little different. Right. We were designing things and we learned things, so you go to Whitby and it was very tall. Yeah. Right. Well, there's a hill there, but it was tall. And so not only there's an educational sort of room there, but the enforcement officers could actually see all the way down the road. So they could see all the way down the 401, looking to the west to the eastbound traffic, and they could see trucks before they were coming. They could see what was happening when they turned their lights on, getting better visibility of the area. There's other things that we learned. We have oversized loads that operate throughout the province, super loads that operate throughout the province, LCVs, long combination vehicles and whatnot. The difficulties that we had sometimes getting them in and out of our inspection stations. We also had new technology coming online, right? So like heat sensors, looking at wheels, things like that. scales, the weigh in motion scales, where you're not stopping statically on a scale, you're driving over and it's weighing you while you're passing over the scale. That type of technology coming online, we really wanted to bring it into our inspection facilities. But, the first thing was, how do we design a commercial vehicle inspection facility, not just a truck inspection station, because that's what was traditionally called them. But really it's for all commercial motor vehicles. Any CVOR bearing vehicle has to come in when those lights are on. And how can we improve it? And so we took our lessons learned. We spoke with officers. What would be the best thing for doing inspections? Well, when it's -30 and it's a blizzard out, but I know I got to go out and do that vehicle, it'd be nice to have something over my head. It doesn't have to be indoors,
right?
They're reasonable, but some protection. So I'm not shoveling to do my work, and, I'm not waiting for something. I'm not delayed. Those types of things, lighting, and then we started to go looking at scenarios. What happens when you stop this vehicle and you have to reweigh it? It comes through weigh in motion and something doesn't look right. And so we ended up coming up with this design, kind of a generic design, where they're designed for a lot more parking, to accommodate a lot larger vehicles, like parking for even like vehicles that are resting. Right. You need to move a super load. Sometimes you can only do it between certain times, right? And then you need to stop it and park it on side of the highway. They need a place of refuge. They're not often available. Like the private truck stop doesn't really want this massive load in their yard, but we can accommodate it there. And we started designing them with more of a racetrack design. Training facilities and double stories, right? That type of thinking. And so we have rehabilitated a few of our stations in the province, and you'll see those sort of concepts coming out. The racetrack design, where you can send a truck around to the back and then loop right back around to the front again to pass back over the scale. Lot easier than forcing trucks to back up.
Yeah, true. Right?
Some of those issues that we used to have with truck drivers that would pull ahead. We knew there were some gamemanship there, I accidentally overshot the scale. They hope that you just wave them, and then you say, no, you got to loop. Oh, okay. So that's the plan. In Eastern region, we did shut down some facilities for a while. You're going to see there's some coming back online. Other ones are parking accommodation, something that we needed to come up with, specific to COVID. We had a heck of a lot of goods that were moving in a different form that they were before.
Right. Yeah. Good point.
So we needed to start considering things, and the lack of truck stops, the lack of bathrooms, the lack of private facilities that were offering opportunities to truck drivers. So, those types of, there were thoughts previously, because we would have liked to seen LCV parking areas or something, that was more provincial. So now we have it. Right. The truck inspection stations that were decommissioned, there are parking lots. They're for all truck drivers. There's, sometimes it's just a porta potty and a garbage can, a bear bin or something like that. You'll notice that as well in the north. We have lay-bys, a lot more. We're putting lay-bys in place where drivers have facilities and things. But the CVIF, sort of the commercial vehicle inspection facility, is the big thing. Like moving away from truck inspection station is something that is a lot more accommodating to our officers, a lot more accommodating to the trucks that are on road. And like, albeit we don't have pits and things like that, we do have recessed areas. So when a truck pulls in, it's recessed, so the officer has an easier time getting in and out underneath the truck, can complete a full level 1 inspection in the middle of the night in a snowstorm sort of thing, underneath the truck with proper lighting and being able to complete what he neds to complete, because sometimes it's just hard to get underneath. Yeah, I mean, especially multi-axle semi-trailers and things like that. It can be quite difficult to get yourself underneath. I'm a small guy. Some of our officers are quite large. They're big men, big women. They're a lot bigger than me. I'm 5'7", so I can squeeze in to any of those spots that, some of the other folks might not be able to. Yeah. And so this is it's pretty welcoming. Plus they can use a crawler. They're not on their back in gravel. They're on a crawler on asphalt or concrete. It's a lot more welcoming to our officers. And it kind of goes hand in hand with what we're doing now too. because I was obviously early on in the after the last election, not this one, current one, but the previous one, Auditor General came in and looked at our enforcement program. And that gave us the impetus to hire more vehicles, equip those vehicles appropriately, hire more officers and train them up appropriately and give them the proper tools to do their job. Coupled with the CVIF sort of concept, now we have facilities that are there that are going to be in place that really accommodate the truck regime, the commercial motor vehicle regime in general, and our officers. But we also have targeted enforcement program. And so now they have the vehicles to actually be able to do it that are fully equipped. You didn't have to bring in a second vehicle with scales or something. Everybody, a lot of these SUVs you see, like Ford Explorer style vehicles, police interceptor style vehicles, they do come with, They'll have full scale system in the rear, anything that they need to do their job, and they can do remote enforcement darn near anywhere. Wow. So, and coupled with the police, municipal police and provincial police, you'll see that we have been doing, there's the traditional blitzes that you hear,
right. Safety week and stuff like that.
Yeah, and Canada's Wonderland parking lot, right? Or Walker's Road in, I guess it's Mainway Arena in Burlington. We always know, we hear about them. It's remarkable that you hear about them, and sometimes they're even announced in advance, and we still catch a bunch of folks. But now you're going to start seeing in different areas, not where traditionally we would be, right? That's what we need, and the ability to see in and around a facility, right? If you're higher up and you can see the service roads around a facility and see trucks passing by the scale, he just got off at that ramp and got on that ramp behind us, maybe we should go out.
Take a look at it.
Yeah. And then, then he's looking in his rear view and he's got a green and white behind him. So, yeah.
No, some good changes. Like I said, kind of catching up with the times, a lot of changing in the industry, and it makes sense that the ministry kind of follows suit as far as, the enforcement, keeping the roads safe, making sure the vehicles are operated safely within the hours of service, and finding different ways to do that, and, providing a facility that makes it better for your officers to do it, but also good for the trucking community. It's a better place for them to stop. It just overall, it's a better experience, for everyone on the road, with the net purpose of being safe on the road at the end of the day. So it sounds good. Something to look forward to as everyone's on the highways. They can check them out and watch it change slowly over time.
Yeah.
Excellent. Hey, I want to thank you for hopping on and taking some time with us today and walk us through kind of what's happening over at the MTO. It's always good to hear, what's going on behind the scenes and what you guys are working on, and, what we can expect to see in the future. So I appreciate that.
No, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So that concludes today's episode. I want to thank Joe from the MTO for joining us. And to catch up on past episodes, check out transportationexchangepodcast.ca. And until next time, thanks for listening.